You didn't think anyone was watching. That's the part that makes me smile. That quiet, comfortable certainty you carried around. The one that told you the audience was small, the stakes were low, and the people who laughed at you were somehow separate from the world you were building. You thought humiliation was a verdict. You thought when they pointed and whispered and decided together, in that coordinated little chorus of contempt, that you were less. You actually believed that meant something. Here's what you missed. Humiliation is not a conclusion. It is an opening move. It is the first page of a story that the person holding the pen hasn't read yet. And right now, at this very moment, you are holding the pen. You just don't know it because you're still standing in the room where it happened, replaying the moment, adjusting the memory, filing it under evidence that I am what they said. Let me tell you something about the people who humiliate. Not the psychology textbook version. That's a lot of words that add up to nothing. I mean the raw, observable, irrefutable truth about what a person actually looks like when they reach for humiliation as a tool. They are afraid, not of you specifically, of themselves, of what it means if you succeed, of the recalibration that success would require, the uncomfortable arithmetic of having to revise every judgment they ever made. You know what I've noticed? No. Actually, let me put it differently. You know what humiliation really is when you strip away the performance of it. It is a bet. They bet loudly, publicly, in front of witnesses, that you would stay exactly where they put you. That's the wager. And right now, whether you realize it or not, you are the only thing standing between them and their winnings. Close the door on that room. Pick up the pen. Let's not skip past the part that actually happened, though. Because I'm not going to pretend the wound isn't there. That would be boring and dishonest. And I have a very low tolerance for both. It started before this specific moment. You know that, even if you haven't admitted it. The humiliation you're carrying didn't begin with whoever just did it. It began with the first time someone in your life communicated to you clearly and with great conviction that your instincts were wrong. That the way you naturally moved through the world was too much or not enough or inconveniently different from the way they'd prefer. It could have been a classroom. It could have been a dinner table. It could have been a circle of people you thought were on your side. The specifics don't interest me. The pattern does. Because here is what happens inside you over years of that message. You develop a monitoring system, an internal surveillance apparatus running constantly, designed to catch you being yourself before anyone else does. Before they can point at it, you've already hidden it. Before they can name it, you've already apologized for it. You become very good at making yourself small in real time. Not because you are small, but because you learned empirically that smallness was safer. And then someone humiliates you anyway. Despite all the monitoring, despite all the preemptive self-erasure, they find the thing you didn't hide in time, or they invent the thing you didn't even have. It doesn't matter, and they hold it up and they laugh. And the audience, which is always larger than you wanted it to be, laughs with them. And what do? If you are most people, you fold. Not loudly, quietly. You go home and you replay it, and you make small adjustments. Shrink here, be less of that, avoid this room, don't speak until spoken to. And what you're actually doing is surrendering to the wager. You're letting them win without telling them you've conceded. You become the ghost of the version of yourself that frightened them, haunting the edges of every room you enter. Careful, careful, careful not to take up space they might claim they own. I've watched this happen. I've watched it in people I found genuinely interesting. And then I watched them sand themselves down to something blunt and safe, and profoundly dull because someone they respected less than themselves decided to laugh. And now, I'm watching you. There is a thought, I suspect you've had it, late, in the specific quiet that comes after the kind of humiliation that goes public. A thought that goes something like this. Maybe they saw something real. Maybe the laugh was accurate. Maybe the problem isn't that they said it. Maybe the problem is that it's true. I know a man, impeccably principled man, deeply invested in doing things the right way, whatever that means on any given Tuesday. He spent years convinced that the criticism aimed at him was somehow insight, that if enough people found him difficult, difficult must be a flaw rather than a feature. He kept adjusting, and every time he adjusted, the criticism found something new. Because that's what criticism does when you give it permission. It doesn't run out. It expands to fill whatever space you clear for it. He thought the problem was him. The problem was the math he was using. You can't subtract your way to approval. You can only subtract your way to disappearance. So let me ask you the thing no one with good intentions will ask. What if the laugh wasn't about accuracy at all? What if the people who humiliated you were not delivering a verdict on your worth, but simply announcing the limit of their tolerance for anyone who doesn't make them feel safe by being smaller? That's the question. Hold it. Don't answer it yet. They called it failure. They called it embarrassing. They called it proof of something. Proof of your inadequacy, your arrogance, your naivety, your absurd belief that you were allowed to try something they didn't pre-approve. Wrong word. Try again. What they witnessed was exposure. You tried something in public, which is to say you put a piece of yourself where it could be seen, judged, and potentially rejected, and then it was rejected. That is not failure. That is the fundamental cost of entry for anyone attempting anything that matters. The only people who never fail publicly are the people who never go anywhere in public. And that demographic, I assure you, does not end up in anyone's story, except as an example of a life quietly not lived. The word failure is a cage. It is constructed specifically to keep you from trying again. Because failure, by definition, tells you something conclusive. But what actually happened was not conclusive. What actually happened was a data point. A single, poorly lit, poorly sourced, deeply biased data point collected by people with a vested interest in the conclusion. The word you are looking for is information. Uncomfortable, expensive, publicly delivered information. But information nonetheless. A person who has been given information is not diminished. A person who has been given information is, if they're paying attention, equipped. Let's talk about where humiliation gets its teeth. Because it doesn't actually draw blood on its own. It only hurts because of something you already believed before they said anything. If a stranger on a street corner told you that your molecular biology was wrong, you would not spend 3 days in existential crisis about it. You'd assume they were confused, and you'd move on. The reason humiliation lands, the reason it stays, is because some part of you agreed with it. Not all of you, but some small, carefully hidden corner of your interior T had it already decided you were on borrowed time, that the confidence was a performance, that eventually someone would notice the seam. That part didn't come from them. That part was installed earlier by someone whose opinion felt much more like architecture than commentary, and what the public humiliation did wasn't create the wound, it just found it. Put a spotlight on what was already bleeding underneath the very convincing outfit you'd been wearing. This is the real origin, not them. You before them. The version of you that learned to preemptively agree with the worst version of the story as a form of insurance against the pain of being surprised by it. They didn't build that. But they used it, and now you get to decide whether they're allowed to keep using it, not by arguing with them, not by proving them wrong, by removing the internal lever they reached for. Now here's where it gets interesting. Let's look at them, the ones who laughed, the ones who organized the performance of your humiliation, because that's what it was, you understand. A performance, directed, teamed, executed for an audience. Which means it wasn't really about you. It was about what you represented to them, in that room, in that moment. People who are genuinely secure in themselves do not organize public humiliations. That's not something a person who has resolved their internal accounting bothers with. That is something a person does when they are desperate to maintain a specific social architecture, one in which you being elevated threatens something in them, something real, something they'd rather not name in polite company. I once had the distinct pleasure of watching a man deeply principled, never broke a rule he didn't design himself, go to extraordinary lengths to maintain the impression that the chaos around him was somehow separate from the order he believed he represented. The chaos always came back, of course, But he kept insisting on the distinction between his methods and the methods he condemned. The difference, he believed, was intention. I found that a fascinating kind of arithmetic. Convenient, too. What you were shown in the public architecture of your humiliation was not your inadequacy. You were shown their fear, their math, their need to keep the leaderboard exactly where it stood before you arrived and started making it complicated. That is what judgment from a frightened person looks like. Loud, organized, with an audience if possible. Here's the part no one tells you, because it requires acknowledging something most people find unpleasant. Being publicly humiliated and surviving it and choosing not to collapse is a competitive advantage of the first order. Not metaphorically, concretely. You now know something about yourself that people who have never been tested don't know about themselves. You know where your floor is. You've seen the worst version of the external verdict, and you are still here, still functional, still. And this is the critical part, still thinking. That is information about your actual architecture that no amount of comfortable success can provide. Furthermore, the people who humiliated you have now handed you one of the most clarifying gifts available in human social navigation. They've identified themselves. They've told you, with great precision and public commitment, exactly what they are. They have removed all ambiguity about their motives, their methods, and their tolerance for your success. You no longer have to guess. You no longer have to hope. You know. That is not damage. That is a map. And the last piece, humiliation, when metabolized rather than suppressed, produces a specific kind of focus that comfortable people simply don't have access to. It is the difference between someone who is motivated and someone who is clarified. Motivation runs out. Clarity doesn't. Clarity knows exactly what it's building and why, and it doesn't require external approval to keep going, because external approval already showed it what it was worth. Build in silence. Let the silence be the answer. There's a difference between a wound that controls you and a wound that informs you. This distinction matters more than almost anything else, I'll say. Some people take the humiliation they've been handed, and they marinate in it. They let it define the entire grammar of what they do next, every choice, every escalation, every late-night maneuver, motivated by the need to make a specific set of people feel a specific set of feelings. That's the wound controlling you. It looks like drive. It isn't. It's a leash attached to people who don't deserve the power. What I'm describing is different. I'm describing the person who processes the wound, takes it apart, finds the real information inside it, discards the noise, and then makes a quiet, settled, non-theatrical decision about what they're going to build. Not for the audience, not for the ones who laughed, for themselves, because they've decided, without drama, that the best possible response to someone's public bet against them is to simply make the bet look stupid, slowly, thoroughly. Without announcement, the knife, held in panic, cuts the person holding it as often as it cuts anything else. The knife, held with intent, goes exactly where it's aimed. Stop asking when they'll notice. Start asking what you're actually building. The answer to the first question is a distraction. The answer to the second is the only thing that matters. The words you use internally are not neutral. They are instructions. And right now, if I had to guess, the internal lexicon sounds something like embarrassing, exposed, worthless, behind, ear. Exposed, worthless, behind, ear, repairable, too late. These are not descriptions. These are commands. Every time you reach for one of those words, you are telling your nervous system to confirm the story your tormentor started. New words, not aspirational, not affirmations. I have very little patience for those, just more accurate. Replace exposed with visible. You became visible. Visibility is not damage. Visibility is prerequisite. Replace embarrassing with costly. It cost you something. That is different from it defining you. Replace too late with not yet done. The people who win obscene amounts of ground in life are almost never the people who started first. They are the people who simply did not agree to stop. Replace worthless with mispriced. Someone looked at you with bad information or motivated information and assigned a number. That number is not the market value. That's one bad faith appraiser at a very small, very poorly attended auction. The language shift isn't about feeling better. It's about giving yourself accurate operating instructions. Here is the thing about the rooms you've been sitting in. Some of them were designed very deliberately to produce the exact feelings you've been carrying. Not by accident, by architecture. There are environments, relationships, professional structures, social circles that function by keeping their members in a state of low-grade self-doubt. Not because the people in them are evil, usually because they are simply maintaining the only social contract they know how to maintain, which is one in which everyone agrees, implicitly, on a hierarchy that flatters whoever built the room. And if you come in disrupting the hierarchy by having more potential, or more clarity, or more willingness to say what you actually see, the room will reject you. The room is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The question is not, why did this room rejects? Me. The question is, why am I still trying to get this room to accept me? Audit the rooms. Not all of them need to go. But some of them, the ones where you leave every time feeling smaller than when you arrived, those aren't rooms for you. They are rooms designed for someone who has already given up. And I don't think that's what you are. The next time someone makes a public move against you, the next time the verdict gets announced, the performance gets organized, the laughing starts, you need 2 internal sentences. Not external ones. You don't say these out loud. You don't need to. These are for you. Sentence 1. Noted. I now know exactly what you are. Sentence 2. Let's see how this looks in 5 years. That's it. No elaboration, no justification, no counter-performance. The absence of performance is, in fact, the loudest possible response to someone who required an audience. This is the last shift, and it is the most important. There is a version of you that has spent a significant portion of its energy negotiating with other people's opinions, with the judgments delivered in the rooms you sat in, with the verdicts handed down by people whose qualifications for judging you were never established. A version of you that keeps the door open to the possibility that maybe they're right. That keeps the internal appeal process running, just in case. Close it. Not in anger, not as a performance of independence. That's just a different way of caring what they think. Close it the way you close a chapter of a book you've finished. With the quiet certainty of someone who has extracted everything useful from it and has moved on to the next page. This is the ownership statement. Not, I don't care what anyone thinks. That's adolescent and almost certainly false. It's this, I have collected the information available in this situation. I have identified what is useful, and what is not. I know what I'm building, and I'm building it regardless of whether this particular audience claps. That posture, that specific settled, non-theatrical posture, is not something anyone can argue you out of. Because it's not a performance waiting to be challenged. It's simply a decision made privately that is now being executed. Daily. Without announcement. Here is what is actually true about you right now. Not what they said. Not what the worst version of your internal monologue says at 2 a.m. What is actually, structurally, observably true. You have survived the thing most people are afraid of. The public verdict. The public verdict. The organized humiliation. The moment when the room decided, together, that you were the example rather than the exception. Most people, and this is the specific fear that causes human beings to not try things, to not say things, to die with a very well-maintained list of risks not taken. Most people structure their entire lives around preventing that moment. They succeed. They never get humiliated publicly. They also never go anywhere interesting. You got humiliated. And you're still here, thinking, processing. Which means you made it through the thing that was supposed to stop you. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the entire difference between the people who eventually build something and the people who don't. The system that produced the people who laughed was not designed for you. I want to be specific about this. The structures of approval, The hierarchies of acceptability, the social contracts that told you that you needed a specific kind of permission to be who you are. Those were not built by people who intended for someone like you to thrive inside them. They were built by people who were comfortable. People who found the current arrangement profitable. People who found the current arrangement profitable. People for whom the status quo was, conveniently, the exact Shah. P of their own advantages. You were never going to fit, not because you are broken, because the room was built for someone else. The silent revenge, the one that actually works, the one that actually lands, is not a confrontation. It is not a speech. It is the extended, patient, thoroughly documented fact of a life that refused to confirm their prediction. It is showing up, years later, having built the thing they bet against, wearing the calm of someone who never needed their approval to begin with. That is the revenge. Not delivered, just lived. And the people who laughed at you, if they're watching, and some of them will be, because that is what people do when they've made a public bet and the outcome is uncertain, they will not see triumph. They will not see performance. They will see something that unsettles them. Far more, someone who simply kept going. That is not something they can argue with. It is not something they can vote down or organize a response to. It is simply the fact of a life that decided they were wrong. Be that fact. The rest is noise.